Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected, or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. And welcome to episode 29, where today I am talking to Cindi. Hi, Cindi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for doing this today under self-quarantine.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate being able to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have heard this podcast, right?
I have. I've listened to, I think, all of them, yes.
Wonderful. So let's go ahead and get started on Cindi's story today. Why don't you take us back to the beginning and let us know what your original family was like and a little bit about your childhood.
Okay. Well, I feel like I had a pretty normal childhood. My parents were married 20 years when I came along. My father was an insurance agent. My mom eventually owned a beauty salon. But my parents were older when I was born. I had a 19-year-old sister and I had a 15-year-old brother. So I came along a little bit later in their lives. My sister was almost like a second mom to me, and she married shortly after I was born. And then my brother married when he was 17 and moved out of the house. So I was almost like an only child. We lived in a city in Central Florida until I was about 13, and then we moved out to the suburbs. And so I had a little bit of a lonely childhood. I was around adults a lot. Most of my cousins, which were paternal cousins, I thought, were older than me. But we had a very close family. We did lots of camping and fishing and family parties. So, it was a pretty good childhood. I always felt a little bit different, though, than others. I was sort of a bookworm. I loved school, and I did really well in school. And as I got older, I wanted to go to college, and really nobody in my family had done that. I had lots of love from my mom. We were really close. But I did sort of always feel a little bit of a disconnect with my dad. Just maybe not as close as I thought we should be. So there were some clues that, of course, I didn't know were clues back then. As I said, my mom was like 38 when I was born. And when anybody would say something about her age when I was born, she sort of made a joke of me being a diaphragm baby, which meant she was using a diaphragm and it didn't work. And so, that was just sort of an accepted reason why she had me so much later in life. I looked a lot like my mom, but she was very fair complected, blue eyes and blonde hair, and I had brown eyes and brown hair. And it was sort of a family joke, which now looking back on it is just really sort of weird, that, that old thing about being the milkman's daughter. Well, they said that a lot within the family, that I was the milkman's daughter. But at the time that I was conceived, my father, my birth certificate father, actually was working for Seal Test Dairy as a milkman. So they just thought that was hilarious and people would laugh about it. And, that's just what it was. And they would explain my brown eyes by saying that my paternal grandmother had brown eyes and brown hair too. And of course, that turned out to be my true paternal grandmother did actually have brown eyes and brown hair, but they were referring to my birth certificate father's, as his mother.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that really stuck out in my mind later on, and one of my cousins actually reminded me of it when I was going through all this, was that my birth certificate's father, so my grandfather, his father, he died the same year that I was born. He died actually before I was born, but he used to call me and would say to my mom when he'd see her when she was pregnant with me, he'd say, "Has little Joe come along yet? Is little Joe going to be here soon?" And the really ironic thing about that is that my biological father's name is Joe. Joseph,
Really?
and yeah, so I don't know if maybe, that was just a joke or if maybe they knew more about that, I don't know, but those were just clues that I had sort of, that as I look back now, I wonder, they didn't mean much to me back then when I was growing up, but looking back on it, it means a little bit more, so but we had, as I got a little older, we had a lot of losses in our family. My sister died when I was 17 years old after
Oh,
having a hysterectomy. So that was a
oh,
very sad, unexpected. She was only 36 years old.
oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And not too long after that, my maternal grandmother died. And then my birth certificate father died when I was 25. So we had a lot of losses all at one time. And it was shortly after that that I started doing genealogy. It just started out. I really, thinking back, I'm not sure why now. Looking back, I wonder if I didn't have an inkling, maybe, or have more of a suspicion than I ever let myself think about. But I started doing research, and it really became a very big hobby with me. I spent just hours and hours. And back then, of course, we were doing all the research in the library. We weren't doing it online. And I did a lot of research in the downtown library and the Family History Center. And went on as I got married and had family, went on road trips to, find places that my ancestors had lived. My mom went along with us because she lived with us as she got a little older. We went to cemeteries and family reunions of people on her side of the family, and visited churches that they'd been members of. So, I mean, I was really pretty heavy into genealogy. And I thought that I had both of my family trees complete. Um, as I went along, I really thought that I knew both sides of my family, um, uh, my birth certificate father and my mother. Many were from the South. We were in Florida for a really long time, and we sort of came over from Virginia and migrated south. So both sides of my family, that seemed to be the way that they uh, came to be in the United States. And I was pretty proud of my Southern heritage. I thought that, that was an important thing to our family. My mother's father settled in the county that I live in back in the mid 1850s, so they'd been here a long time.
Hmm.
Um, I even had taped an oral interview with my mother about her life, and she did not let it on any clues at that point. It was all just sort of, she answered my questions, and she was a little shy about being interviewed, but there was never any clues to anything being in any of the surprises that were to come. So then I started working full time. I had a family, so I didn't spend as much time doing the genealogy. I sort of felt like I'd found everything I could find, and I had our trees done, and everybody in the family always came to me to get the family history when somebody needed it for a class project or, any of that stuff. And then a little later, I had some health challenges in early 2000, 2010, and had some changes in my life. And my brother actually became pretty ill. He had been ill for a long time. and he passed away in 2014. So my mother was still alive. She had moved into a senior apartment, and she was 95 years old. And she fell and broke her femur. And so she wasn't able to live by herself anymore. And she was pretty independent. So she didn't want to come and live with us. So, and she needed more care than I could provide because I was still working full time. And so she went into an assisted living facility, and I sort of helped take care of her for about 2 years, visiting every day and making sure she was okay and stuff. And then she eventually had cancer, and she had had cancer previously in her life. So I don't know if it returned or, what the situation was, but she was 97 by that time. And so she passed away in 2016 and never said a word about anything being out of the ordinary or that any of this had happened. So after she passed away, I started getting interested in genealogy again because I had more time. I had sort of began a more healthier lifestyle for myself. And I found out about 23andMe doing testing. And I guess I may be getting ahead of myself here. I'm sorry, but I've sort of gone through my childhood and now I'm up to what happened. So I hope that's okay.
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
Okay. And so I did a 23andMe test for health reasons, because they were one of the first tests that, determined about doing that. And so I did a 23andMe, and I thought it would be fun to see my ethnicity. I really thought that I knew what it was. I thought we were from sort of England and Ireland, Scotland, that was what I expected to see. And I never expected to see the results that I got. So when I got my results back, that was I tested in June of 2017. So this has all been a while now. And got my results back. And I had never looked at a DNA test before. I really didn't know what to expect, even though I'd done all of that genealogy research. I really hadn't gotten back to doing it so much since the computers were all into it. I had done it the old-fashioned way. And I looked at it, and the results came back that I had 29% Italian. And I was like, okay, well, maybe somebody had some Italian in them that I didn't know about, but it just didn't seem, it didn't connect. And so then I really started doing quite a bit of research, trying to understand more about the tests. I went to some of our local genealogy meetings. I went to the library and got some volunteers to help me, start looking at it, and started looking at the different groups on Facebook that might be able to help me with that. And I really was confused about the whole thing. I was like, I just don't think it's right. All those typical things that people say. And when I tried to talk to any of my relatives about it, they were like, oh, that stuff, you don't need to believe any of that. That's not accurate. And I'm like, no, it's DNA. It doesn't lie. So there's got to be some reason that's coming out that way. And I did have on my birth certificate father's side, I had not been able to trace his paternal line back very far. So there was in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, maybe there was some Italian there and we just didn't know about it. So I think that gave me an excuse for a little while to not really face anything. But so I decided, well, I probably need to take another test and see. So at that point, I had learned about ancestry, and I decided that I'd take an ancestry test. Well, it came back 31% Italian with all the other things, mixed in too. And at that point, I was like, okay, well, I had learned enough, I think, at that point by doing some research and reading stuff online. I had learned that, okay, there's got to be something going on here that I don't really understand or know what it is. And so I began by sending some messages to some of my DNA matches because I really was suspicious that something wasn't right, but I really didn't understand what it was. Um, when I started looking at the matches, I had all these Italian names that I didn't recognize, in addition to a lot of cousins that I didn't recognize. And it really took me a while to understand. And even back then, I don't know how much, I didn't know you could separate people out and you could look and see which ones were related to whom. And I was really very naive about all of that. And really, it was a very sort of steep learning curve for me. But I did start trying to learn and figure it out, and I began to be suspicious that something, wasn't right. And reading online about all the people that had had similar kind of things happen to them. In November of 2017, I got together with some of my paternal female first cousins. There's about 5 of us that get together about every 4, 5, 6 months and try and have lunch or dinner together and sort of stay connected. All of our parents are deceased, so we're sort of the only connection that we have to our generation. And we had gotten together this time because one of my cousins was not well, and we really wanted to try and get together. And one of them, actually, one of the cousins, flew in from North Carolina to be with us so we could all be together and see each other. And I had decided that I was going to share with them about what I was going through with taking the DNA test. I had said something to a couple of them, and they had, before this luncheon, and they both said, "Oh, don't believe those things. That's, a bunch of, don't, there's not anything to those tests. They're not accurate and all that." So I knew that they were skeptical, but I still wanted to ask them. And actually, I had bought a DNA test and brought it with me to the luncheon because I was going to ask one of them to take a test, because I really felt like that was the only way I was going to know for sure about whether my suspicions were true, because at that point I was thinking that perhaps my biological father and my birth certificate father were two different people. So we got to where it was sort of my turn, and I was telling them what was going on with me and bringing them up to speed with my life. And then I told them about my genealogy research, and that I'd taken these 2 tests, and they'd come back with this Italian ancestry, and I didn't understand. And I was hoping that maybe I could ask one of them to take an ancestry test and see if we matched. Well, my cousin, who was not well, spoke up and said, "Cindi, I've already taken the ancestry test." And I went, "Okay." And I said, "Do you have your matches where other people can see them?" And she said, "I think so, but I don't really know or understand that much about it." A friend had given her the test and she'd taken it. And that's sort of when it like hit me between the eyes, I guess is the best way to say it. Um, I felt like the floor fell out from underneath me. I felt the room moving around like, oh my goodness, because I think that's the moment that it really hit that I knew that if she and I didn't match, then everything that I thought was probably true. And so I explained that to them, and they still were not believing me. But one of my other cousins agreed to take the test that I'd brought, and she said, "Well, we're going to take it, and we'll see if we match or not." And I said, "Okay, well, that'll really tell us, because if the 2 of y'all match, then I'll know that that's really, the way it is." And so I went home and looked and made sure, and my cousin that had taken the test shared all of her results with me, and we did not match. So as far as I was concerned, I pretty much knew at that point that there had to be something not right about all of that. And it really, I was very surprised. It never entered my mind, I guess, up until that confirmation that the father I grew up with was not my biological father. I really had no reason to suspect. I just, it just didn't seem to be part of my world. But then there it was right in front of me. So I went back and looked at all my ancestry information, and I had a second cousin match that I knew was not on my mother's side. And so I sent them a message on Ancestry. And the test was actually a male second cousin, but the person who responded to me was his wife because he was in his 70s. And so she and I exchanged a couple of emails, and then we eventually talked on the phone. And she was familiar with the Italian names that were on some of these matches. But we still couldn't, she really wasn't able to help me figure out. She told me this person was married to this person, and, she was able to give me some details, but none of it really came together right so that it was easy to figure out who my father might be. She told me that there was also her husband's sister also lived in the same town that I lived in. She still lived there. They lived out of state, but the sister still lived here. And she gave me her name, and she said, she's might be able to give you some information. And actually, she worked for the same employer that I did. So after that conversation, I just tried to do lots more research. I created a mirror tree. I did all the things, genealogists are supposed to do to try and figure out what was going on. And I sort of thought I had it figured out to some degree, at least the families, but it still didn't quite make sense. So I finally sent an email to this man's sister. And about the same time that I did that, and that was in April of 2018, so right at 2 years ago, I had another second cousin match on Ancestry pop up. And so I sent an email to that person and told her I'd been talking. She didn't know how we were related either. And I told her some of the names I had been researching. Well, she was on my biological father's maternal side, so she wasn't as familiar with those families. But we finally ended up, all of us met together, the second cousin and the two second cousins and myself met at a Panera's one day. And I brought all of my mirror trees and all my stuff that I'd done and what I'd been able to find online or, just doing research. And we sat down and looked at it. And the older of the two looked at it, and she said, well, she confessed to me that she was concerned that I was going to tell her that her father was my father, but that was not the case. And she's in her probably mid-70s. And I said, no, I don't think that's the case. I said, the way this is all shaping up and the way it looks, I think this person might be. And she looked at it and she said, I would not doubt that at all. I think that's a very real possibility. And I said, yeah, I think so too. And she knew quite a bit about that person and his family, and told me, that he'd been married a few times. He had other children, and she just thought that that might be. And so I said, okay, well, that gives me something to go on. And so we actually looked while we were there. I had brought my laptop with me, and I found his obituary. So he had died in 2010, but it listed all of his children.
Mhm.
And so and so I do all my searching on the computer, and I find out that one of his daughters, one of my half sister, still lives in the same town that I live in, or very close to it. And then I had their names, so after that it was pretty easy to do my research and get information on them. And so I found email addresses. Well, I was pretty shocked at that point. I was still trying to get used to all of it. And so I didn't reach out right away. I it took me it didn't take me a long time, but it took me about a month before I was ready to try and reach out. And I didn't I didn't know what to say or how to say it. So I looked online and found some, recommended contact letters and that kind of stuff. And I sent a letter to my to each of my half sisters. One lives out of state, and one lives in the same state that I do. And I immediately got a response from an email from the sister who lives out of state. And I explained to her what I had found and what I thought. And she was very, very open from the beginning and very willing to share information. And I told her that she'd never taken a DNA test, and I told her I had an extra one, and asked if she'd be willing to take it if I mailed it to her. And she said she would. And so I sent it out the next day so she could take the test. And because, that was sort of the final piece of confirmation that I needed to know.
Yeah.
And she was very gracious. She shared family pictures. I mean, she was already as convinced as I was, that it was definitely the right thing. We just didn't know. We had no idea, other than the fact that they lived in the same city. We really didn't understand how or what kind of contact they had had, or relationship they'd had, or any of that. So and it gets sort of complicated here because he was married 4 times. But while he was not with her mother, he was not married to her mother when I was conceived. He was married to someone else.
Mm.
So that he did not actually have children. No, that's not true. He had my older brother with that person. So, so, um, so we corresponded with each other. We emailed back and forth a lot. We actually got on the phone and talked to each other quite a bit. And her test came back in June of 2018, and it confirmed that we were half siblings. So that was sort of like then I knew for sure.
Yeah.
And she sent me an email as soon as she got her results, and she signed it sis. So that made that made me
sweet.
feel very, very good and very welcomed. And she's been great. And so we set up a time and we talked. We FaceTimed each other once so we could see each other, in real life. And it was amazing how much we have in common. We don't necessarily, I don't feel like we look like each other a great deal. I look a lot like my mom, but it certainly explains where I got my brown hair and brown eyes from. And I think we have a similar smile a great deal. And the really interesting part was she was able to share with me a picture of my aunt, so my biological father's sister, who has also passed, but she sent me pictures of her when she was younger, and we favor each other a great deal.
Mm.
And so that really was amazing too, to see those pictures and see that. But I had not still heard from the other sister, so I sent a second letter to her, and I did receive an email from her about a week later. She had called her half sister and to check me out, make sure I was legitimate and stuff. And so I did hear from her, and then we had dinner together shortly after that and met, and she also shared a lot of pictures and family information. Her mother was married to my father for a long time. It was a little over 30 years, so she really had probably spent the most time with him out of anybody. Um, and then shortly after that, I got an email from my sister that lives out of state, and she said, "I want to come visit. Is it all right if I come and visit you?" And I was like, "Oh, that would be just wonderful. It would just be fantastic." So in January, she came and visited me for about 4 days. She was here, and I got to meet one of my half brothers who lives not too far away. And then she and the other half sister, the three of us, got together for dinner one night. So none of them are real surprised that they had another sibling out there. I guess,
Mm.
their father was sort of a little bit of a Latin lover kind of guy. And so
Mhm.
they were not too surprised about that. Um, but so he was married 4 times. He had 6 children, including me. I learned that my oldest brother had died in 2015. Oldest half brother, he had died in 2015, and so then the sister that lives out of state, one of the half brothers lives near her, and then one lives here part of the year and lives up north part of the year, and then the other half sister is here. But it's really the half sister that lives out of state that has really maintained a relationship with me and has been very open and willing to have a relationship. I'm planning to go and visit her in her hometown in July, and we've sort of made a pact that we're going to try and visit each other back and forth. She lives pretty far away, so it's a distance to travel. But and I recently connected on Ancestry. I had a girl pop up that matched me, and she contacted me and, how do we match? Because, of course, my name doesn't match any of their names. And I found out that it's my oldest half brother who is deceased. It's his daughter.
Mm.
And so she and I have emailed back and forth several times, and she also lives out of state. She's not here. But so the sort of the, I'll tell you how I figured out who he was. It took a little bit of genealogy research, but and how they knew each other, I guess, is really, I mean, I knew who he was, but how they knew each other. So everybody is deceased. There's really nobody to ask questions of. Um, you know, um, there just isn't any relatives around that would have been alive at the time. So one of the things I started doing was looking in the city directories at my local library, which is something I've done, for other research. And I thought, I was in there one day and I thought, well, I'm going to look and see where my mother was working, like the year I was born or the year before I was born. So I pull out the 1956 directory and I look at it. And of course, by this time, I'd learned a lot about my biological father and his family. And they had actually immigrated from Sicily and had resided in the same town as my mother and father for years and years and years and years. And they had a cigar factory that they both ran together, my grandfather and father. And I pull out the city directory and I look at it in a city. I don't know if everyone knows this, but a city directory will give you your home address and it will give you your place of employment. And there in black and white was my mother employed at their cigar factory. And I
Oh,
and I looked the year before that and the year before that. So for 3 years before I was born, she actually worked at his cigar factory.
well,
So
there you go.
there I go. And that's probably, as close as I'll ever get to knowing what kind of relationship they had, if it was short, long, brief. There's all kinds of scenarios that have
Mhm.
come into my mind about that. But I'll never really know the story. And I think enough time has passed that I've sort of accepted that. But to begin with, it was pretty rough. I was pretty. I think I was hurt more than anything else that my mother hid it from me and didn't tell me.
Mm.
My birth certificate father had died so many years ago. She had ample opportunity and time that she could have told me about it. But she was a very proud woman, very independent, and I can see, knowing her personality, that it would have been and the time frame that was, in the late 1950s, it just wouldn't have been something that you would have been able to talk about. And I don't know if my birth certificate father knew, have no
Mhm.
idea. I look at pictures of him and I together when I was a baby, and he's smiling and happy and looks like he's really in love with me. So, I just don't know. I didn't feel always that connected to him in a lot of ways, but I have no idea. He loved me, he put a roof over our heads. He took care of us. So I just don't know if he knew or didn't know. And of course, my mom knew what she was doing, so she knew.
Yeah.
But now my ancestry, since they've updated the ancestry, it says I'm 45% Italian. And
Oh,
so
okay.
it updated, when they did that whole update, that made it a lot higher, which is about right because his parents, my father was born here, but his parents immigrated from Sicily, and of course his parents immigrated too. So they have a very long line of Sicilian ancestry. And probably one of the hardest things I had to do was to change my family tree after
Mhm.
all of that research. I mean, hours and hours of my life.
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah. And trips? You said you even took
yeah,
trips.
we took trips and yeah. And most of the trips had to do, or most of that research had to do with my mom's side of the family. So that isn't something that I lost particularly. It was hard to
Mhm.
take because she went on the trips with us. So she knew how much, all of that meant to me. And if she did, and maybe she didn't know, maybe she was in denial, who knows, about the fact that could have been that my birth certificate father wasn't my father. They were married, they were together, so she may not have known. She may have just had an affair and not known. But I think the other hard part has been that so many of them were alive. My birth certificate father was alive until 10 years ago. So I could have easily got to know him and could have gotten to know my siblings because they lived here. I was the youngest of my family, and now I'm the oldest of all the siblings. So I became big sis instead of little sis.
Yeah.
Um,
It changed your birth order along with
yes,
your
yes,
your heritage. Now you're identifying as half Sicilian, and
yeah,
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 wow.
yeah. So it was a lot to take in. But as time has passed, and I think like most people say that have been in this situation, is that finding all of that out and being it's just a shock that doesn't ever completely go away. I'll not think about it for a while, and then something will hit me. It could be somebody's birthday, or it could be different things, and it will definitely just come back and sort of hit me right in the face, and I'll have a day when I'm like really thinking about it a lot, and then that'll pass and I'll be able to. But at the time that I was going through it, I did go and see a counselor. And so I'd have somebody other than my poor husband, who had to listen to me talk about it all the time. And that was very helpful, to go and talk with somebody. I got support through the online groups, and saw that there were other people going through the same thing. And I think that helped a great deal also.
If people would like to know more about you, how could they
Mhm.
get in touch with you?
Well, I am on a couple of different ways. I'm on Facebook. It's Cindi Rogers Harrison, and Cindi is spelled Cindi, and Rogers is with a D. I'm also on Instagram under Deep South to Sicily. So I've written some blog posts about my experience, trying to document it, for myself and future generations. And I also have an email address. It's, I'll spell it out for you. It's Cindi, Cindi, Genie, Genie, 57 at gmail.com. That's one I sort of use for some of my genealogy stuff. So any of those ways.
Great. Well, I'll be connecting with you this afternoon.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this today. And what a story. And I know I was nodding along with most of it.
I did want to thank you so much for doing the podcast. I think it's just a wonderful thing for people to be able to share their stories. It's very helpful. So,
Yes, thank you. It is. It's helpful for me too to listen to them.
mm-hmm.
Thanks again to Cindi for sharing today. These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE that would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come, heal with us.